Welcome to Lead Different.
What does it mean to lead by following? How can ancient vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience make you a more effective leader in the modern world? Welcome back to the Lead Different podcast, where we explore leadership from every angle. Today we have a very special guest, Father Louis Levi Hager, a Norbertine priest from St. Michael's Abbey in Silverado, California. I met Father Louis on a grueling 33-mile pilgrimage last fall in Oklahoma, and I knew I had to bring his incredible wisdom to you. He's a young priest with a deep understanding of service, discipline, and devotion. In this episode, we dive deep into the surprising power of obedience in a world that screams for independence. Father Louis shares how to truly listen for guidance, how to lead without getting burned out, and how his unique life of prayer and service offers powerful lessons for every CEO, manager, and parent. You don't want to miss this conversation. It is going to challenge how you think about leadership and faith. Check out this interview with Father Louis Levi Hager, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and follow our podcast for more conversations to help you lead different.
Why not leadership? Why not lead different?
Welcome to Lead Different, the podcast that redefines leadership and challenges the status quo. Hosted by Daniel Dominguez, founder and CEO of Why Not Leadership. This show is your compass to becoming a better leader through the power of self-awareness. Good leaders foster teams that are engaged, empowered, and energized. Join us on this transformative journey as we equip you with the tools and insights to lead different. Get ready to challenge the ordinary and embrace self-aware leadership. This is Lead Different.
Subscribe now. Discover a new era of leadership. Lead different, because great leaders change the world.
Father Louis, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Dan. Thanks for having me on. Happy to be here.
Well, we're glad you're here, and let's see here. Let's get you on the right screen. Listen, as I said in the introduction, we met last summer at the Three Hearts Pilgrimage in Oklahoma. We were blessed to have you join our Federation of North American Explorers group, and you led us through prayer. By the way, for those that don't know, the Three Hearts Pilgrimage is a 33-mile, 2-day hike through some of Oklahoma's hilliest terrain. At least it looked like it was uphill every time. You know, I think
felt like
there were
that,
downhills, but a lot of hills. And we had young Father Louis with us, leading the way physically, spiritually, and carrying us, really. So we were so glad to have you there. I had a couple of great conversations with you on the walk, and I got home to Albuquerque, and I said, you know what? I'm going to reach out to Father Louis and see if we can't get him on the show to talk about his vocation, his leadership, what he does with young people, through his summer camp and stuff. So thank you for accepting the invitation and the challenge. I know you had to get a couple of permissions to be on.
Yes, exactly. So as you mentioned, I'm a member, part of the Premonstratensian order, which is, in kind of common English, we might call them the Norbertine order. So I'm a Norbertine, and I'm, one of many priests, and we have the 3 vows of poverty, chastity, obedience, which means that I don't get to do anything that's outside of the Abbey unless I get permission from my superior. And that's just so that everything is kind of channeled and directed through that sort of father figure. It's a good image of our whole spiritual life, actually, but that all my permissions and all my apostolic work, like this is truly the sharing of the good news that we have with each other, that always goes through my superior there. So thank you, Father Prior. Thank you, Father Abbott, for letting me be here today.
All right, Father Prior, Father Abbott. Hey, Why Not Leadership and Lead Different podcast listeners, say an extra prayer for Father Prior, Father Abbott, right?
Perfect.
For prayers of thank you and blessings to them. So, we talk about leadership on the Lead Different podcast, but there's a big part of leadership is followership. Great leaders are also great followers, and none of us lead ourselves. So you mentioned the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. I'd love to just dig into that a little bit more, especially, you're a young person, relatively compared to me. Our teenagers are saying, "Oh, he's old. He's in his 30s." But but we're, it's all relative, right?
Mhm.
Tell us about how you, the vow of obedience, especially.
Yeah.
I know that in today's society, it's all about ourselves, right? But everybody says, make your own path, do your own thing. But I think there's such a value to
Yeah.
obedience. So tell us how that spells out for you.
It's a great question. And in some ways, what you just said about a great leader should also be, if he really is a great leader, a man that can follow. Because how can you expect someone to follow you unless you know what it means also yourself to follow somebody? Christ himself says, go sell what you have and come follow me. So our whole life, especially those who are called to imitate Christ in the leadership that we have to give to other people, must be one in which we can first reckon with the reality of, how do I follow somebody else? Because there is always somebody to follow. Our whole world is orchestrated and set up in a hierarchical structure in which we're all being led, one person helping another, all the way to God. And so it's so true that we have the sort of rehabilitation of that reality when you take on, in my case, the vow of obedience. The question often gets asked, what's the hardest vow, or what's the hardest part about being a religious, or in my case, a canon, like a monk, a canon who prays often in his monastery and then goes out and preaches or teaches. What's the hardest part? And people often think, oh, it's poverty because you can't have all the things that you want. No, that's not it. That's not the hardest part. And then people will say, oh, it's chastity because you don't get to have a family and things like that. But in reality, the hardest part and most challenging, and I think it's necessary that it's challenging, is this vow of obedience, because ultimately that's the very crux of the matter where everything went askew from the garden there of Eden in the first lines of Genesis. It was a disobedience that broke our perfect connection that we had with God, and now we're trying to constantly cure that wound, trying very much in our whole life to reconnect all those dots, to reintegrate ourselves so that we can then give ourselves back to God. And obedience is ultimately the one, the most difficult and the most beautiful little antidote for that whole reality. And so I live a life in which it's dedicated by way of a vow, dedicated to that exact rehabilitation of my own human nature, and then by way of example, hopefully other people's human natures as well, their experience of their life. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. And I'll give you this one thing that's why it's so beautiful and so powerful. We live our life and we live our days as we go throughout them, and at the end of every day we should ask ourselves, did I follow the will of God? Did I do what God asked of me? And then there are many ways we can answer that question. We might have veered one way or another. We may have done okay, we might have done great, we may have done not so great on any given day. But for me, because I'm vowed by way of obedience to doing whatever my superior is asking of me for my apostolic work, because of that vow, I can go to bed at night, and even if all I did was pray in the church and go say mass once and then come back to the Abbey, if that's all I did that day, even if though I could have done other and more things, even if that's all I did, because I did it under obedience, I am 100% certain that it was the will of God, and that was the will of God for me that day. And that's a beautiful sort of peaceful assurance. It's magnificent.
All right.
Not
Well,
easy.
I'm going to say this. That's easy for you to say, Father. You're a godly. You're a man of God. You're around fellow men of God all the time. But for business leaders, how do we, for someone who's out here trying to grow a business, lead their teams? Sometimes, I work with leaders of teams of 4 and 5 and teams of hundreds. So how do you? Because I know I struggle with this. Prayer is, I love to pray. I pray every morning, but the hardest part for me is hearing. I don't, as hard as I try to listen. So one of the things I'm trying to do is mental prayer. And at the end of mental prayer, one of the things that we were asked to do is 5 minutes of silence and just listen. And what if you don't hear anything? So how do we get through that 5 minutes of silence where we're listening for God? What do you want me to do with this? How do the signs come? How do we become better listeners during that time?
It's good. It's a great question. Really great question. And I think it's something that came to my mind, actually, this question, when you opened up and you talked about the pilgrimage that we met on. we were walking for 30 some odd miles, and it's exhausting, right? And then the thought that came to my mind, well, what does it mean not simply to walk those 33 miles with a group? That's a beautiful thing, but to be someone who is a leader in that group of people, and you're walking. In fact, we could have a whole conversation just on how a pilgrimage really is an image of our entire life. And if you're going to lead that pilgrimage in some capacity, like I did, being the chaplain, then it really is an image of how to be a leader in your entire life, in all the ways possible, because it's just this physical, grueling task of day after day walking and walking and more walking and sleeping, outside and it's cold and all these things. So it's a perfect image of the difficulties of our life, and yet there's a certain trajectory toward the goal of it. So your question of how do we listen well, especially as a leader, so that we can bear, that can be a fruitful experience for us. When you're leading a pilgrimage, in my case, when I was leading that pilgrimage, it's exhausting. You're working hard. You're constantly supporting the other people. You're there to listen to them if they need something. You're there to encourage them if they need a word, and they often need words. You must encourage them, even if you don't think they need it. They need it probably. You encourage them by way of your words, by way of your own example of walking well through this pilgrimage, or doing your duties in the job that you're assigned, etc. But you must every day, you must have some time set aside in which you can recharge, for lack of a better word,
Right.
which you really think about things, because there's a beautiful principle in philosophy that you cannot give what you don't have. You cannot give what you don't have. And that's so true in our spiritual life, in our life of virtue, in our normal life of human interactions, or like normal social, emotional interactions. If I don't have a pleasant disposition, how can I give that to you and evoke that from you? If I don't have a good work ethic that I'm willing to sit down and bear with the task until its completion, how can I expect that of you, or as a leader, expect you to draw that out of you? So we have to have this moment, especially in our spiritual life, in which we're not just giving to other people. We have to sit back and let God give something to us so that we can give it. And so that moment of mental prayer, vocal prayer is beautiful, and we must do vocal prayer, and we do that all the time, praying the rosary, praying a chaplain, going to mass, going to the various other sacraments that we can be participants of. All of those are beautiful vocal prayers, and we have to do them. But we also need to let God say some vocal prayers, which is what you're referring to here.
Right.
This idea of mental prayer, contemplative prayer, simply, there's many ways you can do that. And sometimes it's what you might call dry, and you don't quite know, like, am I getting anything out of this or not? Doesn't matter. Be consistent. Don't stop doing it. Every day you should do something, but whatever it is, have it consistent. If it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a few minutes, whatever it is, be so consistent with it. God will bless you for your perseverance more than for your super energetic moment one time and then your kind of failure the next time. He just wants you to do the same thing over and over and over again. We're an interesting creature, all of us, actually. We're not like angels. We're not like any other creature. We're not like really other animals or plants. We're very, very interesting because we have this intellectual mind. We're like a spirit in that way. We have a soul, right? We can think things. Unlike animals, we can really consider things. And yet we're sort of burdened by this consecutive life that we live. It just keeps going and going and going. And we wax in our energy, or we're not always on point. And so we have to do whatever we can, even if it's only a little bit every day, to be consistent in our prayer life. But especially, as you mentioned, rightly so, in our prayer life that is reflective, or letting God give something to us. I'll give you the advice that Teresa of Avila would give to her sisters there. She said, every time I go in to pray, and she's speaking about mental prayer here, every time I go in to pray, I always have a book in my hands, whatever it is, some book. It could be the Bible, it could be some other spiritual author. And she said, I may never open it, I may never read it, and sometimes I may read all of it. But the point is, I have something in my hands, because we're bodies too. We're not just spirits. We can't just sit there and expect that it's all just going to be this like beautiful little spiritual moment. No, we have bodies. We have to take care of them. And so holding something, in her mind, it was a book, and holy water sometimes. Holding that book. And if she found that she was getting distracted in her thoughts, she'd open the book and she'd read a line, then she'd close it, and she'd try to let just that one line be something she can consider. And if she didn't need to read it, all the better, all the better. If she could just hold that in her lap and think about God. We're not going to hear words, locutions. We're not going to see visions. God does that by miracle for some people, fair enough. But our general and consistent experience of this mental prayer is going to be just the silence. And that's fine, because God doesn't need to speak words in order to teach you a lesson. He can work a lot of those details out in your soul. Even if you don't quite understand it, he works those things out in your soul if you give him that chance, and let that be. Doing that every day for a month, for 6 months, for a year is a beautiful thing, and it will change you magnificently. But you have to recharge. And also, I'll end with this little thing. A very beautiful old priest once told me, I was taking care of him. It was the last few years of his life, actually. He was living at our Abbey, and I was, as a young seminarian, I was part of the infirmary, so I was in charge of taking care of him. And it was a beautiful experience, actually. Taking care of the dying is a very Catholic thing and a very eye-opening experience. They say things, wise people, well, everyone really, says magnificent things when they're in the last moments of their life.
Yeah.
Because they have time and they want to say something. Sometimes the Holy Spirit works through them. This priest, God bless his soul, Father Ray, such a beautiful man. He said to me, you're a young seminarian, you'll be a priest someday. And then he said, let me tell you some advice. And he started giving me all these little bits of advice. And I wrote them all down. They were magnificent things. But one of the things that always stuck with me, and I think about it very, very often, he said, when you're a priest, and you can apply this to your own life, if you're a leader of any kind, when you're a priest, you will be used up. People will use you in the sense that they will need you. They will need your advice. They will need your prayers. They will need your support. You have to give them the sacraments. You will get used up. You have to give yourself entirely in so many ways. He said the only way not to be completely used up to the point of where you are broken, he said the only way is that you have to pray. And you have to just sit there and ask Our Lady and her Son, Jesus Christ, to fill you. Just pray to them. Tell them that you need them. Tell them that you need them to fill you with whatever they need to give. He said, if you don't pray, if you don't have that life of prayer at the backbone of all of your good labors, he said, you will get used up and it will be done. You will be done. So it's kind of a good dramatic little bit of advice there from good Father Ray. But it means a lot. You have to pray.
And you now you guys, listeners, now you know why we wanted to have Father Louis on. There was so much you gave us from a question about how to listen. So, man, great advice on a lot of things. We have to be like the persistent widow, right?
Yes.
And if you won't, you might not get rewarded because your cause is just, but you'll get rewarded for that consistency, and your cause is just. And if we're listening, we'll be doing the right thing. And like I said, the mental prayer guide that I'm using just says 5 minutes at the end, so we do a lot of preparation. I read the gospel for the day, and I try to imagine myself being there, imagine talking to Jesus, all those things that we're supposed to do. But then the 5 minutes of quiet, there's so much that can get into our head. I was listening to a Harvard professor, I think it was a Harvard professor, talk about the importance of being bored. So much of our time, and you know this, we fill our time with podcasts. We listen to the radio. We watch TV. We rarely have time to just be bored. And he says it's really good for you to not to just sit in silence. And that's where the deep questions get answered. And you answer them for yourself.
Yes, exactly. And let me add something to that. It's a very beautiful way to put it. We should be comfortable with being bored. We live in a world that is not comfortable with that, right? We fill ourselves with, sometimes it's just useless things. Oftentimes it's actually harmful things, but we just fill our time with this this click and bait, whatever. There's so much just garbage that we fill our time with. And even if we have gone so far to get rid of our smartphone and to get rid of our social media accounts, some people do that because they're so overwhelmed by this. Even if we do that, we still fill ourselves with all this just useless activity, and we're not willing to sit down. The ancient mindset, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, which gets transferred most perfectly into the good medieval Catholic mindset as well, and the church fathers and all of them, that mindset was the highest capacity of the human mind was one in which you were willing to, and this, I'm going to say a word that sounds a little bit strange to us now, but it was the word they used, which you are willing to engage in leisure. Leisure.
Yes.
We think leisure is a luxury now, and in some sense, yes, it is a luxury, but it's not. We have a different mindset now, unfortunately. Leisure was the time that you had in which to contemplate beautiful things, truthful things, good things.
Yes.
Leisure was using your mind in the sense of what we're talking about now, this reality of contemplating or meditating or simply just working out these questions in a sort of silence. And you might have leisure with somebody else. In fact, in many ways, what we're doing now is what all of the ancients, what all of the church fathers and all of the medievalists wanted desperately, which was just to talk to somebody else about good things, about the beautiful things.
Oh man.
Because it's good to be isolated from some time, just for a little bit, to let God speak to you. But most often, we're social creatures, right? Most often, we need to be with a friend, and we need to talk to them about the good things. And that's not work, that's not labor, that's not the other things. This is just leisure, speaking with a good friend. Magnificent. So, yeah.
And you did that for me, Father Louis, during that pilgrimage. We had those conversations, and you're absolutely right. Sometimes it's not by yourself. We long for that companionship, and I love what you said, to talk about good things. Because there's a lot of empty conversations we can have with people with the traditional, hey, so how was work, and busy, and all that stuff. I love what you brought up, though. The concept of leisure. So Arthur Brooks is the gentleman I was quoting, the Harvard professor. He teaches happiness to business MBA students, and he talks about the importance of just letting your mind be and coming up with those great thoughts. That's where, like, as he says, that's where you ask the hard questions. I recently read a book, Slowing Down to the Speed of Joy. I don't know if you read it, Matthew Kelly.
No, I've not read it, but I know him, and sounds like a great book.
Yeah, one of the examples he talks about is the importance of the Sabbath, and so he gives the example of people in university. So probably Arthur Brooks gets a sabbatical every 6 years, right? The 7th year, he can take off a whole year and do whatever he wants. Well, guess what? If you take every Sunday and you really Sabbath like you mean it, and you really, that is, in 6 years, you'll have accumulated 365 Sundays. So you will have had a sabbatical if you treat every Sunday like it's. I mean, the sabbatical comes from the word Sabbath, right? It's they're related. So you get a 365 days every 7 years if you use your Sundays appropriately. Because so many times we feel it with sports, kids' sports, our sports, obligations, or getting ready for Monday. Right. Instead of enjoying, and he talks about it, leisure is used to be something that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, because you brought it up. Leisure was something only the upper class used to have. If you were rich, you could take time to. And now somewhere along the way, that became not a sign. Having a Sunday off became almost a bad thing. It's like, why aren't you working? If you're really successful, you ought to be working 24/7. And that's not success. Success, I think, is being able to take that Sunday and spend with your family and have leisure. So I love that you brought that up.
No, it's good. It's interesting that you brought up the back in the day, whatever that day is exactly. Who could have this leisure? It really was. That was the project of the ancient philosophers, right? They wanted to live a life. Saint Augustine would be a great follower of that same mindset. He wanted to live a life in which he had the time for that leisure with his closest friends. He basically was making a monastery, even though he didn't know what he was doing yet. But he wanted to make a life where they all lived together and they could talk about things and they could simply have this freedom and this space in which to discuss stuff. We back in the ancient mind, the kind of trajectory of someone's life was in some ways in these three ways. You would rest, or rather, you would, how do you put this? If you had three different things you do, you can play, you can then work, and then you can rest. So in the ancient mind, you would play so you had enough energy and vigor so that you can work really hard, that you could carve out enough time to rest and contemplate, to think, to study, is what they would call that. This sort of like leisurely conversation, this leisurely contemplation of beautiful things. That's, in their mind, that was study, like beautiful study, not just the academic life in which we consider it now. Now we've kind of flipped that around. Now what we do is we study, we go through like 20 years of school or whatever it is
Right.
now. You go through 20 years of that so that you can work and I don't know, make a bunch of money, own a bunch of property, so that you can then what? Play. And you put it rightly, sit on a couch and watch sports, right?
Yeah.
It's the exact inverse of what it used to be.
Right.
Usually, you think of like the Greek mind, they would be out there playing, they'd be doing the sports, getting up all the energy and all this so they can work, so they can finally have enough time to study.
Yeah.
And I think we got to get back to that mindset and
Yeah.
study in the right sense, study in this exact sense that we are comfortable with sitting down next to each other and talking about those good things, those beautiful
Yes.
things.
And I'll say this for our young audience, I have one of my good friends, you met Sophia, my daughter, on the pilgrimage. Sophia's godfather is an FBI agent, and he remembers the younger generation. He says, as he was doing an investigation, had to talk to a young man, couldn't sit across the table and talk, and he couldn't get a word out of him, and then he texted him. And they started texting each other across the table. So the art of conversation has been lost because of kids being exposed to technology at a young age, and being that the only way that they communicate. I love that you just gave me a great new excuse. I love doing the podcast. I had Father Peter Pomposello on this morning. We had a great conversation, but this is leisure too, right? And we're enjoying community with each other, learning from each other.
Exactly.
I'm learning a lot more, so it's an unequal balance here. But I appreciate you taking the time. So we want to hang around with people who elevate us, and of course that requires you to sometimes hang out with people who don't elevate you so that you can elevate me. So thank you so much. But let's talk a little bit more about I want to give a shout out in the middle of the show here. So you mentioned one of your ministries when you were a seminarian, taking care of the priest who gave you that great advice. Miles Glatzner is a good friend of ours, and he's the father of Esther, Tony, and Abel, who you met on the pilgrimage.
Oh, great.
And he runs a hospice in Albuquerque. He's the CEO and founder of Inora. That comes from the prayer, Inora, Nunc et in hora, at the hour of our death. So he takes care of dying. It's a nonprofit.
Beautiful.
No charge. Faith. Unfortunately, we took advantage of their services for my mother-in-law when she was in her last days. And it was such a beautiful place because it's a home.
I love it.
And so you're not in a hospital and you're not in a clinical environment. You're in a home. We had a big couch. All of us were sitting there. We had chairs around. And when the time came for her to go, she wasn't in a hospital room by herself. She was surrounded by family. And then we were all able to come around, including Miles, Tony, Esther, and Abel's dad. And we prayed together. And it was a holy place. He has a chapel there. But that's I wanted to give a shout out to those three kids, and then thank you for coming out for that. Where does that, because there's a lot of people, and not just priests, there's a lot of people who would say, man, the last thing I want to do is spend 3 days hiking 33 miles with a bunch of unruly teenagers, right? But there were so many young religious like yourself. There were so many amazing kids, and then of course us old parents that had to kind of keep the order once in a while. And you helped us out so much with that. What motivated you to join us for this pilgrimage? I know you had a personal connection with some of the kids that were in the pilgrimage, but what makes you want to do that kind of stuff?
Great question. I absolutely love pilgrimages. I love the theory of a pilgrimage, everything. We talked a little bit about that already. But specifically for that trip there, I was asked by the FNE, the Federation of North American Explorers. You have a chapter there in Albuquerque. There's a chapter here in my neck of the woods, close by San Diego, Oceanside. And I've been a part of that in a very beautiful way for about a year now as a chaplain to help them out with their various functions. And so to join them out there was a beautiful experience. That was kind of the personal connection. In some ways, though, I think I've been kind of carved up or formed or what have you for that kind of work since I was a little boy. I mentioned to you a little bit in the pre-show there that our Abbey hosts this summer camp every year, and it's very outdoorsy. It's the same kind of a program. You're you're working hard. It's outdoors. It's very simple activities, but grueling and intense and very shaping. It was an all boys summer camp that our Abbey started back in 1961, 62. So a little bit of time ago.
Right.
It's essentially the first few years that our Abbey existed here in Orange County area of California. So it was one of the first apostolates that we started running. And when I was a little boy, about 7 years old, I started coming to that. And that really shaped me, working outside, sleeping in tents, catching bugs and tarantulas and lizards and whatever else, playing in the dirt, playing nation ball, all these things, these outside activities in the context of a group that was also in the context of a monastery, of an abbey. It was this beautiful, simple, mundane sports activities that all boys should be doing outside, playing with a rubber ball, in the context of this magnificent religious life or spiritual life. The summer camp is run by the seminarians every year here at our Abbey, and the priests as well. We all chip in, and it's a really spiritual. It's a spiritualization of a very simple thing, of playing sports outside. And that pilgrimage that we did together with the Three Hearts there in Oklahoma was the same thing. It was a spiritualization of a very simple thing that we call walking. We just walked. We just walked forever. But what we laced into that all kinds of really beautiful activities, praying, singing the rosary. That was a beautiful thing, right? Singing the rosary, singing all kinds of other chants, praying other prayers, the litanies, et cetera, and having mass and blessings before and after the hike, and then ending there at that magnificent monastery with the Benedictines there at Clear Creek. That was the whole thing was spiritual, but really all we did physically was walk. That's all we did. We didn't go and kneel down in front of a statue for 40 hours, which is beautiful. We could do that too. But that activity was walking. And so I think in my mind, growing up at this summer camp, it was more of the same of that, just doing simple things. We prayed the rosary every day. We went to mass every day. True. But the rest of the activities were just simple sports stuff. And every time you turned around, you saw the church steeple and you saw the cross, or you started that sport with a prayer, et cetera, et cetera. So it was like this perfect integration of the spiritual life into the normal activities. And I think that's super important for us, not to dissect those too much or to dichotomize those. Our whole spiritual life and our physical life, our corporal life, our life of exercise and emotions and all that, they're not separate. They're different in some ways or distinct, but they have to be part of a whole, part of one complete person. And so for me, growing up at that summer camp and working hard was a very valuable lesson that I'm continually learning, actually, that we have to constantly bring back this spiritual element into our physical life, and even bring your physical life into your spiritual life, bring it all together. I have the great joy of now being, as a priest, now being in charge of running that same camp. So it's been about 4 or 5 years for me kind of officially running it as the priest on the whole other side of that spectrum.
Right. So you attended as a young man, I think you mentioned 25 years you've been part of that camp. Isn't that amazing?
Isn't that amazing? Thanks be to God. 25 consecutive years a part of this one little summer camp. It's most of my life. It's amazing.
We've got to get you back to Three Hearts this summer. So one of the things, Michael Wells, you met Michael and Alicia, they were the leaders on the pilgrimage from our side, and we're trying to get the school, Chesterton Academy, there this summer. So we're looking at getting a big bus. So can you imagine? We saw those big groups, right? And we couldn't be quite as loud as they were. Imagine leading a group of let's say 40 to 50 of us, and we're working on that. We're in the planning stages. So say a prayer for that, but we'll try to get that done. Mr. Norse, Bill Norse, he's our principal at the Chesterton Academy. He's very, very much for it. So it's just a matter of the right things coming together. We got to raise the money for the bus and all those things. But imagine, I'm looking forward to it because I had to drive the last couple of years, and that's tiring. And so being able to sit in the back of the bus and enjoy the trip, more conversation, right? Although I got to admit, we had some great conversations on the bus, on the drive with Alicia, was my co-pilot, Alicia Wells. So that's all good stuff. You talked about spiritualizing exercise. I think that's really cool. You can spiritualize just about anything, right? Say a prayer before you start. One of the things for me, looking at spreadsheets, good gosh, if I never had to do that again, organizing is hard for me.
But I love the thought of, okay, you know what? I'm going to say a prayer. I'm going to dedicate this to something or someone or a cause. And then spending the 10 minutes that my brain can look at that, hopefully 30 minutes at least, so I can be productive. But that's a beautiful thought. You're an outdoors guys. I know you mentioned going out with the Explorers. So tell us about that experience. You went out with the Explorers in California. You did something with them on a raft, I think. Can you tell us that story? Because that's what led to your involvement with the Explorers.
That's a great story. It was my first experience with these scouts, the Explorers, these Catholic Explorers. I have done obviously a number of things with our own summer camp, and I've gone on hikes and treks and things like that. But this group from Oceanside called me up and they said, "Hey, we have our annual canoe trip. Would you like to be the chaplain for it?" So I said, "Yes, of course. That sounds amazing. I would love that. I've never canoed before, but it sounds great." So so they said, "Okay, it's 3 days. We're going to canoe about 40 miles or so down the Colorado River." I said, "Well, that sounds amazing. Sign me up." So I sign up and we're ready to go. We drive out there. It's the Colorado River just on the border of California. So it's this nice windy part of the river there, really beautiful. And it was a great experience for a number of reasons. It was my first experience with those scouts, the Catholic Explorers there. And I was amazed to see how well formed this program, what kind of formation this program offers to these young men. You know, they're teenagers, 14, 15, 16 years old, something like that. There's about 40 of us, something like that, maybe a little bit less. We're going down the river, and, you know, we spend about 10 miles down. We're going down the first day, and we dock the boats on some beachhead there. It's, you know, pretty rustic. And in the matter of 5 minutes or so, I'm out on the beachhead, and I look back, and these young men, these 14, 15-year-old boys, really, truly young men, actually, you got 5 guys pulling up all of the canoes and portaging them off to the side, tying them down. Another 5 guys are unloading all of the gear. Another 5 guys are setting up the tents for the night. 1 guy's over there starting the cooking for the dinner. And here I am unloading my mass kit on the little table there, and I'm getting ready to say mass before dinner. And I'm just looking around and seeing this beautiful operation happen. It's magnificent. Yeah. And it ties, I think, very much so into this reality of talking about leadership. I saw in that weekend, especially, and more so as I continued to work with these scouts, these Catholic Explorers, I saw that weekend that there was really great leadership, and it wasn't this imposition from the leaders that were there, some of the fathers that were working with us, the fathers of the sons there, and some other leadership, adult leaders. It wasn't this imposition. They gave these young men the freedom to what? To be out in the middle of nowhere on these canoes going down this river, which is a beautiful experience. The boys loved it. I loved it. But they gave them the freedom to run it. And that's the kind of the value of being out far enough in the wilderness, is that if you don't do a good job, you might not make it back, kind of thing, you know, where it matters. Everything you do really matters. You have to cook the food. No one else is you can't buy it. You're not going to go anywhere else. You got to cook it. You got to cook it well, and you got to do it right and ration it out so everyone gets food. You got to save the water. You got to, you know, et cetera, et cetera. You got to put your tent up right, because it's going to get cold tonight. You know, all these little lessons. Everything matters so much. And to see that work, it worked well. All these boys were just so efficient. They were excited to be there, and they worked hard. They worked really hard that weekend. And here I am in the canoes thinking, what did I get myself into? This is the most
I hope I don't drown, right?
Amazing experience. I was canoeing in my habit too, so it was a pretty wild sight to see. It was great.
You know, you as you were talking, I'm remembering. So I get an opportunity to hang out with the Explorer boys, and I get to did some work with the girls over the summer too.
Good.
But they all have a role. There's a cook.
Yes.
There's a leader, right? They have a leader. They have a medic. They have a herald. You know, so everybody has a role, and what you saw is everybody doing their job.
Exactly.
And leading from their position. And if everybody does their job, the tents get built, the meal gets cooked,
Exactly.
the scrapes and bumps get taken care of by the medic. Everything happens in order, so that, you know, it's funny because I was just talking earlier today. I did another interview with Father Peter Pomposello, Army chaplain, and same thing. You know, in the Army, everybody has a job, and if everybody does their job, things go well. If everybody doesn't do their job, then it doesn't go so well.
Right.
And you're having to send sad letters home.
Exactly. That's the sort of magic and the mystery even of being the leader in a group like that, or any group, right? Any kind of organization. I lead my summer camp here every summer. I help in some ways at least lead some of those F&E scouting groups there, at least as a chaplain. When you're the leader, that doesn't mean that you're in charge of doing all those other jobs. It means that you're in charge of making sure they do their job, which sometimes looks like you don't do anything. That's what it looks like sometimes. Management, you're back there, you set everyone up for success. You convince them that they can do their job, you train them well, and then you let them do it. And maybe the first couple times they're going to fail, fine, maybe. But they need to do it, and they need to know that they have your support, that they can do it, and that they can do it well. And then you have to give them that space. That's a hard thing for a leader to do. That was a hard lesson for me to learn over the years of when I was still a seminarian. I started taking on the leadership role of running the whole camp, our summer camp, and being not officially the leader. I wanted to just do all the stuff because I knew how to do it all. I could get it done faster and better than anyone else, so might as well just do it all myself. And it's not the way to do it. That's just not how you run anything. You can't do it all yourself, actually. And that was another great bit of advice I got from another abbot, a Benedictine abbot. He said, I had to learn when he was in Abbey. He said, I had to learn how to ask somebody to do something for me. I had to learn that. That's a hard lesson because I know I can do it, and I probably can do it better than them just because I have the experience. But that's not good enough when you're a leader, because if you just do everything, then the people that have to follow you, because there will be somebody that has to follow you, they don't feel necessary. They don't feel like they're valuable. They're not integrated or integral into the program. And if you've ostracized the people like that, then you're not a leader. You're not a leader.
No, that is great advice. I deal with founders and CEOs all the time who, they started the company, so they know how to do everything in the company. Right. But guess what? You're no longer 25 years old. You're now 55 years old. And if you're doing all the stuff, you're not taking advantage of your team, and you're not letting them grow. I think the other part of it, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it, is you have, like you said, that you know how to do it as well or better than they can. That's not the point. The point is you have to let them fail, and sometimes let them fail and learn from that failure, because they're only going to fail once. I think unless somebody's going to lose a life, let them fail, because they're going to learn from it. Right. There's very few times when you just have to step in and say, wait a minute, don't point that gun directly at his head, because that could lead to something fatal. But other than that, let them experience the failure of, you put up the tent and you forgot to put the pad underneath, and so the water's coming in underneath, and you guys are all getting wet. You know what? You're going to be wet. You're going to be cold, and tomorrow morning you're going to hate the guy that put up the tent. But I bet he doesn't mess up again, right?
Exactly.
Those are that's that confidence that you instill in people, and then dealing with the failure. Tell us about that. I mean, I'm sure you had an opportunity where you let somebody do something that you could have done way better, and they did it really badly. How did you deal with that? I'd love if you have an example, and how do you mentor someone through that failure? Because they feel bad, you feel bad because you could have done it better. You probably feel like, gosh, I should have just done it, but not coming down like that and actually letting them learn from that failure. Do you have something that you can share with us around that?
I'll say there's at least a couple little examples that come to my mind right away. So in addition to kind of being outdoorsy and enjoying that kind of work and running the summer camp, I often find myself over the past number of years now working in our little wood shop here at the Abbey, which is very humble, small little thing, but we'll make things that we need to make. We're usually preparing furniture or making picture frames or stations in the cross, things like that. So working with wood is a very interesting experience because it's very hard to do it alone. If you're working with big pieces of wood, you need to assemble a big frame for a door frame or for whatever. You usually need somebody else working with you. So there was one occasion I was working with a young seminarian at the time, and I just kind of used him as an easel, actually, or a seesaw, I guess. He just kind of held things for me the whole time, and it wasn't very, very pleasant for him. But that's because I knew I could do all the stuff. So I did all the stuff myself, and I just kind of let him just hold a piece of wood when I needed someone to hold something. And of course, I was a young seminarian too at the time, so I needed to learn many things, and I did, at least some things. And the next time I had seminarians working with me, kind of thinking about that, I wanted them to do a lot of the work, and it takes time. It took my time. I had to teach them, here's the tool, here's how you set up the belt sander, and here's how you use it, and here's how you don't use it, how to give them constant things. And I gave them enough training, and then you just have to like let them go and do it. And the first couple of times they fail. Like, let's talk about sanding. You're sanding a piece of wood, you go against the grain, you damage the wood, depending on how serious you go against it, and you have to do a lot of work to correct whatever damages you've made there. And so, they're going for it, and they're doing it wrong. And then I see their work eventually when they're done, and I can either just fix it myself later on, or I can show them that, hey, here was the mistake that was made. We're going to spend the next day and we're going to fix some of this. And so, we did that. And what ended up happening at the end of all that is that they have a skill. One, they actually went through the process of doing it, and they were told in a nice way, right, that they did it wrong or partially wrong. And then they got the chance to fix it. They got a chance to redo it. And that's important, that they got the chance to actually rectify, to make right the fault that was made. It ends up being the story of our life. We go and we commit all kinds of faults and failures and sins in our life. And then we go to the confessional, and we're not just simply corrected, but we're actually given the principle of a new life. We're given that grace back with the knowledge of how we got into the mess in the first place, so that we can get out of it again, so we can avoid the temptation in the future. And that's what our whole life is. It's not just trial and error, but it is about learning from the difficulties of having failed in some way, or at least the potential of having failed, and then moving forward. It's a necessary part of our life.
Well, and I think for leaders, it's a learned skill to allow people to fail, and for them to feel comfortable that, if I fail, I'm not gonna get yelled at. I'm not gonna lose my job. As a leader, you've got to support that failure and say, hey, you know what? Great try. How can we do it better? What did you learn?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. What did you learn? And that's in the military, we called it the after action review. I know the explorers do something like that, where this is what we were going to do. Right. We were going to build a tent. What actually happened is we built a tent, but it got flooded overnight. Yeah. That's what actually happened. What did we learn, and what are we going to do different next time? Right. Exactly. And that's where you create checklists. You put two people in charge, and they remind each other, hey, don't forget to put, we've got to do certain things to ensure that we don't sleep in water. But they're sometimes some of the best memories. The other thing you mentioned earlier when it comes to exercise, we turned walking into something really beautiful. Yeah. That feeling you have when you've expended all your energy and you're sitting around a campfire, just enjoying a meal, finally letting those bones rest, bones and muscles rest a little bit. I find that we have some of the best conversations at that time, because you don't have the energy to play a video game or do anything. You just kind of want to sit back, eat your meal, and have a conversation. We had some great conversations at Three Hearts. The other sacrament that you didn't mention was you also offered walking confessions, which, if you've never done one, what a cool thing. You're walking along. It's, depending on how long your confession is, you can knock out a couple of miles while you're doing your confession and penance, right? Makes the miles fly by a little bit faster, or maybe with more trepidation. But we get to do that. And you offered that, I think that the whole time that you were there, and people took advantage of it, which was really cool. And I saw other priests that were on the pilgrimage doing that too. So, there's a certain beauty to just being just totally tired. And the only thing you can do is just, hey, let's talk. I remember Deacon Morris, who was on the pilgrimage with us, and he and I had some great conversations at the end of those long walking days.
It's good, actually. I'm glad you brought that up, because it ties in very much into my life. I'm a religious, as we mentioned already. I'm a canon at a monastery, which means that our first job is to pray the liturgy as best as we can, in all the ways that I can. So we sing the choral office. We have our conventional mass, in which we have as much bells and whistles and incense and candles as we can for that. That's our primary job, to do the liturgy as best we can. And then from the fruits of that, we go out and preach and teach, et cetera, et cetera. We also run some parishes in the local area here. But because our job primarily is to be sitting in the church for our liturgy, for praying, contemplating, et cetera, because that's our job, what ends up being a very pivotal thing for us is that we take seriously the times of our liturgical cycle for fasting and abstinence and for vigils or long prayers, right? And in some ways, what a vigil is doing is trying to accomplish exactly what that pilgrimage did for us, or any kind of very exhausting activity, a good activity that you're kind of used up at the end of it, and then you're sort of resting in this perfect contemplation of God or conversation with somebody else, beautiful things. It's because we're physical, we need to actually be like depleted, and then in those final last fumes of our existence, if you will, we hand that over to either a beautiful conversation with somebody, or in the context of my life, into prayer. And that's what the ancient mindset was of what a vigil was supposed to do to us. We fast and we pray for a whole day, late into the night or all night long, and we're exhausted by the end of that. We're so exhausted that even in those last few moments, we hand everything back to God in those last moments of our energies before we are completely depleted. And giving that back to God is some of the most beautiful moments, when you know that you have nothing left to give, when you give that to Him. That's a magnificent moment. And things like pilgrimages or camping trips or these exterior things accomplish that as well, very, very quickly, because we deplete our physical energy. So that's a valuable thing. My life, taking on these vigils and these late nights. Sometimes we have all night adorations that we take guard in front of the Blessed Sacrament throughout the night. All of those things are so valuable, because there's something extraordinary about the human capacity to be completely done and then give that to God. And I think in a very real way, that has to be what a leader does at the end of almost every day. You should be used up in so much, because you're striving for the perfection of everyone that's under you. You're trying to get them all to do the best that they can, and that should be exhausting. You should get to the end of your day and say, I'm done, I'm used up, and then say, I give this to you, to God.
Oh, man. You said a lot. It's interesting. Simon Sinek does talks to Navy SEALs about who makes it through Navy SEAL school, and that can be applied to Army Ranger school, whatever, anything that's difficult. And he said, who makes it through? It's not the strongest, it's not the smartest, it's not the most athletic. Who makes it through? It's the person that gives it everything they've got, and when they've got nothing left to give, they turn to the guy next to them and say, how can I help?
Yeah.
When they've got nothing left to say, nothing left to give, they still say, hey, how can I help you? And they help the guy next to them. And sometimes all they need, not that they need help, they just need to hear that somebody's willing to help. Because you're both just as tired and wasted, right? Yeah, sure, you're going to help me, bud, but it's just good to know that you're here with me. I'm still really good friends with the kid that, I was 23 years old. So over 30 years ago, when I went through Ranger School, we're still friends. We were in the same patrol a lot of times, and went through a lot of stuff, lost a lot of weight, and suffered through some things. But you remember, those are great memories. And what you're saying is, as a leader, I think you have to be able to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Tough day, meetings with investors, meeting with clients, people hung up on you, angry customers, all that comes with it. And then somebody comes in, 19-year-old employee who is having a hard time making their rent, and maybe they need an advance on their pay, and you've got to really put on your good hat, because guess what? Everything that happened to you doesn't matter to this young person that's coming in for help, right?
Yeah,
they have no idea what you've been through, and you have a choice in that moment to lead or to allow your life or your day to take over.
Exactly. I agree. Well said.
Well, Father, I gotta always ask this question, and we're running out of time here. So, what does it mean to you to lead different? How do you see leadership as different in the roles that you play? How can leaders lead in a different way today? I'd love to just hear your thoughts on the thought of, how do you lead different?
It's a great question, and I think I mentioned this obliquely there in the pre-show to you. Recently, just last night, actually, I was leading a scripture study class for some high school boys, and we tackled a few of the words there at the beginning of Genesis, when God makes man in his image and likeness. And there's a long conversation to have about that, but what we get out of that first few lines of Genesis is that man was created to guard and to work, to till the soil and to keep it, is the kind of English translation. But to work, the Latin words are to work and to guard, to have custody over something. All of that, those two things, to guard and to keep, to guard and to work, those two things make up what it means actually to have dominion over something, lordship, mastership, or leadership over something. That those are what it means, what it truly means as a man to do that. So to answer your question, how do I see answering the question, how do we lead differently? How do we do it better than we've done it in the past? How do we do it more right than we've done it in the past? It's exactly those two things, that our leadership, our lordship, our governance, whatever it is, that has to be at the service of our work and our guardianship of those things that are placed under us. We have to work for them and we have to guard them, because the whole point is essentially they're not going to reach their perfection. They're not going to be happy. They're not going to be satisfied. They're not going to be successful, whatever it is, unless you do that for them. It's
Right.
not, oftentimes when people say, oh, dominion or lordship or mastership, they're always thinking about the relationship of someone who is in charge of a servant or a slave or something like that. But ultimately, what the burden is on the master, not on the slave, in a real sense of this
Right.
leadership. That master is in charge of, responsible for that person's perfection, happiness, success. And if they don't get it, then that's the failure of the master, not the failure of the servant. And so as we lead, I think that's the one thing I would say. If we are going to be good leaders, good, in my case, pastors or good abbots or superiors of religious institutes, if we're going to be good at that, then we have to be able to rehabilitate in our mind that my whole job about being a leader is to perfect them, to make sure that they get where they need to get, which is to care for the whole good, right? Because if they get where they need to get, everything works out. Everything works out.
Yeah, I used this in another video, but I'm going to use it again because it's important. You know, when raising kids, a lot of parents worry about grades, sports, and music. And the video said, you know what we need to worry about? Their soul, and their soul. Good. Those are the three most important things. Father, that was a great answer to that question. Thank you so much. I'm gonna give you. I always forget, and so whenever I forget to do this in the pre-show, is the last question of the show is why don't we leave the show on that note? And the answer is why not. So I'll ask you that in a little while. But before I do that, I'm going to remind our viewers: don't forget to subscribe to the channel, to the Lead Different podcast channel. Don't forget to leave your comments. If you learned something from Father Louis today, make sure you leave us a comment. If you have a question, I will make sure and email him. I'll track him down and get you an answer. If I can answer it, I'll answer it. But if you have a question on leadership, on any of the lessons we talked about today, stewardship, taking care of people, living your best life by starting with obedience, anything that came up today, please put it in the comments. We love answering questions here at the Lead Different podcast. But hit the subscribe button, share it with your friends, and guys, F&E, guys, I want you to know I'm going to try to recruit Father Louis to come back out in October. It's actually on my birthday weekend this weekend, so really looking forward to it. I'll be celebrating my birthday out in the woods in a tent somewhere, and we're trying to talk Mom into coming. So Sophia and I have been going, but Mom hasn't gone yet, so we're going to see if we can get her out as a volunteer. Father Louis, what do you say we end the show on that note?
Why not?
Thank you so much, Father Louis, for sharing your wisdom and your time with us today. Guys, tune in next week for another episode of the Lead Different podcast. Have a great rest of your week.
This is Lead Different.
Subscribe now. Discover a new era of leadership. Lead different because great leaders change the world.